Okay, I'm going to talk about the female reproductive cycle. You might want to print out these notes that I posted on my website and follow along as we go through this, but we're going to be talking about the endocrine system's role in the female reproductive cycle, and we're all going to focus around pregnancy. And so the first thing we'll talk about is if you're not pregnant, what sort of hormones are interacting and what sort of interactions they have if you're not pregnant. And this cycle, on average, is about 28 days for the average human female. Now, that will vary. Some women have shorter cycles than that, and some women have much longer cycles than that, but the average is 28. So the very first day of that cycle, which is day 1 when you're not pregnant, your hypothalamus, which is located in your brain, going to send out GnRH, which is gonadotropin-releasing hormone. Now they're going to send that hormone to the anterior pituitary gland, which is right next to it, and that's also, in your brain. And so that GnRH stimulates the anterior pituitary gland to release 2 hormones, FSH and LH. FSH is follicle-stimulating hormone, and LH is luteinizing hormone. These are 2 glycoproteins, and these are going to be released into the blood, because remember, that's what the endocrine system sort of relies on, is transporting hormones through the blood. So, anterior pituitary releases FSH and LH into the blood, where they will travel and reach their targets. And our targets in this case are the ovaries, which are located right inside the hip of females. There's one on each side. And these ovaries will have receptors for FSH and LH, and that's how we know that they're a target cell. So the ovaries have receptors for FSH and LH, and FSH and LH is going to stimulate the production of estrogen, which is released by the ovary. Now, estrogen is a lipid-based hormone, all right, so its receptors are going to be on the inside of the cells. But estrogen, what it's going to do is it's going to help mature the egg, all right, and it's also going to help build that uterine lining. And so the uterine lining of the uterus of a female, the uterine lining is called an endometrium, and it's full of tissue, and there's a lot of blood vessels that feed that tissue, and the estrogen is going to stimulate the production of that uterine lining, so it's going to start building up. And so about halfway through the cycle, FSH and LH, they're going to help stimulate the egg as well, and the egg develops in something called a follicle. All right, so there's a follicle, and the ovaries take turn as to which turn is it every other month. And so your left ovary could be maturing a follicle, and about halfway through the cycle, so this was an average cycle, that would be about 14 days, about halfway through the cycle, the egg is released, all right, because it's mature. So remember, females are born with all their eggs at birth. And so all the eggs that a female will ever have, she will have once she's born. Now, all of those eggs are frozen in metaphase. Once they get the signal, they'll complete the cell cycle, and then they mature into a mature oocyte. And so halfway through that cycle, that oocyte is released from that follicle, and it leaves the ovaries. It actually ruptures the ovary wall. Some women can feel this little sharp pain about halfway through their cycle, and it's called ovulation pain. And that egg will start moving down the fallopian tube towards the uterus. Now, that's about halfway through the cycle. We call that ovulation, when the egg is released. Now, the uterine lining has been building up thanks to the help of estrogen. Now, there's another hormone that comes into play. Oops, we'll talk about that in a second. The other hormone that comes into play is progesterone. And progesterone is secreted by the corpus luteum. So this is the cross-section of an ovary. Right here is the beginning of the fallopian tube. And so this yellow body, which is that's what corpus luteum means, this yellow body is producing progesterone. And progesterone has a particular role. It maintains uterine lining. All right, so the estrogen is going to help build that uterine lining and get it nice and thick. And progesterone, which the corpus luteum develops about 14 days. So after the egg leaves, the little follicle becomes the corpus luteum. There's no longer an egg there, but this little body remains. It's secreting progesterone, which is going to help maintain that uterine lining. Now, the reason that it wants to maintain that uterine lining is hopefully well, hopefully depending on your particular circumstance, but that egg that's released, it's hanging out in the fallopian tubes, it is waiting to be fertilized. All right, and if fertilization were to occur in the fallopian tube, that fertilized egg, which is now a zygote, will travel down the fallopian tube and implant on the uterine lining. And this thick uterine lining has a lot of blood flow to it. It's going to nurture that zygote in the beginning stages of development. Now, let's say that you're not pregnant. There's no fertilized egg. What's going to happen is this corpus luteum that's hanging out in your ovary is going to break down. Now remember, what was it secreting? It was secreting progesterone. What was progesterone doing? It was helping maintain that uterine lining. So when this breaks down, this is going to drop, which means the uterine lining will no longer be maintained, and so therefore it will be shedded. All right, and so it will shed, it will exit through the cervix and out through the vagina, and this is called menstruation. All right, so the menstruation is the shedding of that uterine lining, and that day one of menstruation starts the whole cycle again. And again, like I said, on average, this is about 28 days in the average female. Could be shorter, could be longer. Let's say that you are pregnant, all right, or someone is pregnant, not you necessarily, but someone is pregnant. So if you are pregnant, that means there's a fertilized egg in your fallopian tubes, so that's a zygote. The zygote is going to travel down to the fallopian tube and implant on that thick uterine lining. All right. The fertilized egg produces a hormone called HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin. Now, what this chemical is going to do is it's going to communicate with the corpus luteum. It's going to go and it's going to prevent corpus luteum from breaking down. Therefore, the corpus luteum will continue to produce progesterone, which maintains that uterine lining, which the fertilized egg needs in those early stages of development. About through the first trimester, the fertilized egg needs that uterine lining for the development of the fetus, and then after about the first trimester, the placenta has fully formed, and it will take over the role of nurturing the embryo and fetus at that point. And so the home pregnancy test that you might be familiar with, where a woman urinates on a stick, and the stick will indicate whether or not she is pregnant. They're testing for this hormone right here, HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin, because you would not have this in your system unless you had a fertilized egg, which is a little zygote. And so a lot of times in the first trimester, women get really sick. They have morning sickness, and that's due to the high levels of progesterone in their system that's helping maintain that uterine lining. And so progesterone and estrogen, they stay elevated in the early onset of pregnancy, and so that's sort of the symptoms of that. So that's your female reproductive cycle. Here are two graphs. Now the female reproductive cycle is actually two different cycles. It's the ovarian cycle and the uterine cycle. And so you can see right here at the top, this is about 1 through 28 days. This is about the average cycle of a woman. And you can see the pituitary hormones, the anterior pituitary hormones, their levels. And you can see that there's a surge of LH and FSH right before ovulation. Here's the uterine lining. You see how it was building up to a certain extent, and then it will be shedded if the corpus luteum breaks down. And you can see that right here. So here's your egg development. It's developing this growing follicle. About halfway through, there's ovulation, so that egg's released, and what's left is the corpus luteum. And like I said, the corpus luteum will break down about 14 days after ovulation. Again, that's on average. Unless it gets a feedback from HCG telling it to stay intact. The ovarian hormones, which are estrogen and progesterone. Estrogen, it's stimulated release by FSH and LH, and it will increase, and it's helping to to build that uterine lining, and progesterone helps maintain that uterine lining. And so these are some different things that are going on during the female reproductive cycle. It's a little bit more interesting than males. Males are pretty steady. They don't go through cycles, and so that's why we talk about females. So let me know if you have any questions, and I hope that was helpful.